Every one step, you're one step closer to get it right there where you're meant to be. With every one step, you get closer to your dreams. Into the sky and your feet. With every one step, you're one step closer, closer. With every one step, you're one step closer. Yeah. Deliberate impossible.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the classes participating in our presentation of Jane Garcia's Heroes program. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I run an organization called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So we connect classrooms across North America and around the world for live events with scientists, adventurers, explorers, and conservationists. If you want to check out any more of those events, your teacher can visit exploringbytheseat.com, and you can find all of the events that we have coming up, and you can tune into past events as well. Okay, so I'm so glad you're joining us as we meet one of the heroes, artist, conservationist, journalist, educator, and researcher, Melanie Kirby. She is one of 10 experts featured in Jane, the new Apple TV Plus series about 10-year-old Jane Garcia, who is on a quest to understand and protect endangered animals like her idol, Dr. Jane Goodall. In fact, why don't we take a quick look at the series right now? I've got a little video clip that I would like to share with you. So let's get that front and center. And here we go.
From Apple TV Plus.
What are we looking for again?
That's a gharial. There's only 600 of them left in the whole world.
Turn back! Turn back!
Graybeard! Mom! You know chimpanzees can't swim.
Based on the mission of Jane Goodall.
The animals are endangered. Every year there are less and less of them.
We have to help them.
If everyone worked together, we could save them. Only if we understand, will we care. Only if we care, will we help. Jane Goodall said that.
I know. You recite it every morning.
Let's go. Imagining lets you picture something you've never thought of before.
Whoa. Let's save some bees.
Ready, Graybeard? Can we put our plan into action? Ready if you are.
It's cute. In an ugly kind of way.
Imagine a better world and journey to save one species at a time.
We're trying to figure out why they like to come out at night.
Sounds like quite the mystery.
Have fun saving the world.
Together, huh?
Together. I'm never letting you out of my sight again.
Jane.
Why does everything we try to save attack us?
Streaming April 14th on Apple TV Plus.
All right, very cool. And I hope that some of you have been able to check out this series as well. So in addition to learning about Melanie's experiences with honeybees, you're invited to join Roots and Shoots, Jane Goodall's global program where young people like you can take action in their communities, making the world a better place for people, other animals, and the environment. We hope that you will join them, and I'm going to share the link up on the screen where you can check it out, rootsandshoots.global. We're going to share another link at the end of today's event with a little video, but this is one spot where you can dive a little bit deeper and join in the action. So whether or not you've seen the honeybee episode from the series Jane, in which Melanie appears, you're in for a very special program today. And I know that Melanie's well prepared to answer any questions you might have about her experiences and this magnificent species, the honeybee. So Melanie has worked for several commercial queen bee rearing operations on the Big Island of Hawaii, in Central Florida, and in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. In 2005, she decided to return to her home state and establish Zia Queen Bees Farm and Field Institute in northern New Mexico. She's also an explorer with the National Geographic Society. So I'm going to bring in Melanie live with us right now. Here we go. Hey, Melanie, how you doing today?
Doing great. So happy to be here.
All right. It is so great to have you joining us live. I feel like I just saw you in the episode of Jane. It was an awesome episode. And honeybees are so cool. So we're excited to dive in with you and learn a little bit more.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to share. And I think like some beekeepers, we sort of just end up being invited to interact with bees, and we don't necessarily realize that they're going to become a real passion for us. And they really have taken me around the world. So I'm super excited to be visiting folks from all around the world to talk about bees.
All right, Melanie. Well, as you get your screen share ready, I'm going to just give a quick shout out. We've got camera classrooms hiding backstage. We're going to meet some of them soon and get some of their questions. And I see some groups saying hi to us on YouTube. We've got groups in New South Wales, in Bundaberg, Queensland, in Victoria, Australia. So keep saying hi on YouTube and use that chat to send us some questions when the time comes as well.
Awesome. Well, great. I think I've got it all lined up. Do you want me to go ahead and click share?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. I'm hoping you see it all. Does it look okay?
It looks good. I think we're ready to rock and roll.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Really excited to have the opportunity to spend some time with you. And even though I'm thousands of miles away, I'm right here with you and looking forward to your questions. And so I know we haven't met in person, but I thought I would start out a little bit with a video I made about what my inspiration is for working with bees. So this presentation is called Bees Around the Globe, and I'm going to start with this video that I call Nectar Nomad. That's what I call myself. I've traveled many a bumpy road in the darkest of nights, serving as a chauffeur to beings of sweet starlight. I migrate with them like a shepherd, roaming with my flock of winged midwives, as a fellow follower of the bloom, a self-proclaimed nectar nomad. I was introduced to this artistic science of beekeeping 2 decades ago as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer collaborating with peasant farmers in South America. The bees captivated my curious mind, and working in an outdoor office made of fresh air, flowers, and freedom enticed my soul. My nomadic journey as an apiculturist has taken me far from where I could ever have imagined, having come from a humble home in Pueblo Indian country in New Mexico. My heritage is a mosaic of cellular memories influenced by my Native American ancestors, who instilled in me a profound reverence for place and purpose, and to pursue acts of community service. So I chose to become a bee farmer, as I wanted to continue to learn from Mother Nature and Father Time. As a farmer, I share beekeepers' voices of concern and need for adaptation and innovation to fulfill our dedication for local to global food production. Sharing their challenges, I became encouraged to return to academia to help quantify their observations and advocate for pollinator conservation. Now, as a researcher, my quest to better understand the relationship between cultures, food systems, and stewardship is at the forefront of my thoughts. Honeybees are like some of us and our ancestors, immigrants to this country. They have adapted and become the backbone of agriculture. There are distinct ecotypes or subspecies of honeybees like races and humans, and these ecotypes carry genetic histories like seeds which contain their very existence and memories of creation. For within each one, they have the power to nurture and adapt, and the magnificence to create life, food, and medicine for the world. One of the things I most enjoy about beekeeping is that it bridges cultures and goes beyond borders. It connects us to our origins as fellow beings of light, as a part of this land, not separate from it. This magnificence is alluring and inspires me to find and connect with bees and their keepers around the globe. I invite you all to accompany me on my Nectar Nomad storytelling journey as I chase the bloom, encounter cultures, and follow the liquid starlight known as honey from flora to flavor to feast. Played the flute music for me. She's what we call a wind rider, because she knows how to play the flute, which is pretty cool. And yeah, that's sort of my story in 3 minutes. But of course, it's been 27 years that I've spent working with the bees, and they have really taking me far beyond I ever thought I would get to go. And I've gotten to visit a lot of different countries, and there's still a lot more I'd love to visit, including Australia. I have yet to come visit, but it's on my list to come and visit. And you all have such amazing bees there. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I call biography, sort of a play on words for geography, but we'll call it biography, and about the different kinds of bees around the world. And there's actually over 20,000 different kinds that we know of, and there's probably a lot more that we don't. Some of them are super duper small, like the size of a grain of salt, and some of them can be quite big, bigger than your thumb. And so they range in sizes and colors. And you can see some of the different ones that are here in this picture, which is really cool. And depending on where they live and depending on what their habitat is or what type of flowers are nearby, will determine how they actually live their life in terms of their biological cycle. So some of them live in cold places. You can see the mountains here in the background, and I don't know if you can see the bee, it's right here on the flower. And then some of them also live in very warm places. And each kind of bee looks very unique. And I don't know if you all might recognize this one. This one is actually found in Australia, where you are at. This is called the blue banded bee. And you can see a little bit of blue striping on the body, or what we call the abdomen. And the blue banded bee has been observed in all these different spots in Australia. So maybe some of you are from near one of these spots, and so you can keep an eye out for them and see if you run into any, if you get to see any of them. Some of the bees are what we call solitary, and they live alone for the most part. Sometimes they make their home in old stems or little reeds. Some of them make their home in the ground. Some of them make their home in wood, and some of them make their home inside trees or in other types of abodes that they find, sometimes even in caves. So they're pretty intelligent creatures, and they're also very resourceful, meaning that they are really good to learn about what's around them and what then they can use to survive, how to survive in that type of environment. And while some of them are solitary, meaning they live alone, some of them are actually what we call eusocial or social, and they live in either a colony or a hive. And this here are some bumblebees, which are smaller little colonies. And then we have honeybees, which can actually have really large colonies or hive families. This is actually a swarm of bees. I call this one three scoops, like three scoops of ice cream, because it looks like three different dollops of them. But there's actually one queen mama in there, and they can smell her. She emits pheromones, which are like perfumes. And so they recognize their mom. And so then they will follow her where she goes. And when they get really sort of cramped for space in whatever house they're using, then they will divide in two. And the original mom will actually, they'll quit feeding her for a little bit so that she can lose enough weight to fly. Because when she's laying eggs, she actually is really plump. And so then she can fly off with about half the population. And that's what we call a swarm. And they're just actually looking for a new home. And then the other half of the population will actually stay and rear a new queen. They'll make a new queen mama. So it's pretty cool how they're able to not only reproduce just individually, like here's one little honeybee who's actually visiting some flowers, but then also how they can actually divide via swarming and create two big hive families. And one of the reasons that they do that is it's not only part of their own biological cycle, but it's a way in which they can expand and actually they provide a lot of services to our communities, not only if you live in the city or in the country, but also in the wild landscapes. They help to produce a lot of different food. And so we're going to talk a little bit about pollination. because that's one of the main services that the bees actually provide. They help to pollinate so many different kinds of foods, including seeds and nuts and fruits and vegetables, even some plants that aren't necessarily insect pollinated or needing to be pollinated by a bee. Say they're pollinated just through the wind, blowing their pollen around. Even if bees are present, they can help with that pollination still too, even though the plant might not need it. So I love this picture because it shows a real close up of all these tiny little pollen granules. And the pollen is really, really special because it's basically got all these memories, all these stories of the season before from the plants. And then it gets carried on to a neighboring plant. And then those stories get to help create a new story, help to create new seeds and create fruit. So here's some pictures of a few of the different varieties of fruits and vegetables and seeds that they help to pollinate. And this makes them extremely important in terms of our biodiversity. So bio means life, and diversity means many, right? So many or much life. And that's really important because if everything was the same, it probably wouldn't be as interesting. So some of the pollination, I'm going to play here a little video for you. This is actually a couple bees that I found super early in the morning in my front yard a couple years ago, visiting actually a plant called a datura flower, which is a medicinal plant, and it normally blooms at night, but it was cooler in the morning and it smelled so sweet, and these bees found it really early. So you can see they're actually gathering the pollen. You can see it sticking on their legs. And they're actually gonna take that pollen to another flower, and then that will help the seeds to actually begin forming, and I'll show you here a little diagram of what is pollination. And some of you may already be familiar with this, which is great. And so this might be a slight review. And if this is new for anybody, I hope that this encourages you or inspires you to learn a little bit more about pollination. But basically, you have one flower that's saying, "Hi, I'm here." And you have another flower that's saying, "Well, I'm over here." And they basically don't know really how they can interact. And so the bees are the ones that help the flowers interact, and they take the stories and the memories from one that are in the pollen and they carry it over to the other flower. And then that way they can start to reproduce. So they actually help the plants to have babies, which is pretty neat if you ask me. That's a really big, important job. And so why do the bees actually do this? Are they just trying to help the flowers, or, what are they getting out of it? And really, it's a nice exchange. It's what we call symbiotic relationship. They help each other. The flowers need help to make their babies, and the bees also need help to make bee babies. And so actually the pollen that they collect, some of it will actually get taken back to their own hive, and you can see it here on the left. All those different colors are from different flowers, and that's actually called bee bread. It's pollen and honey mixed together, but that is actually their protein, and so that's what they use to feed their babies. In the picture on the right, you see a little bit of glistening, kind of looks like a little bit of milky clouds in there. There's a little baby larva, bee larva in there, and that baby larva is sitting on royal jelly. And so the nurse bees will actually eat a lot of pollen in order to produce royal jelly, which they make from glands in their mouth. And everybody gets that for the first 3 days, and then the diet changes. And I'm going to show you here a little bit about how these baby bees are made. Hopefully there won't be a commercial, but if there is, we'll skip it as soon as we can.
Here is a bee egg as it hatches into a larva. Those newly hatched larvae swim around their cells, feeding on a liquid food that nurse bees secrete for them. Then their head and their legs start to differentiate as they transform into pupae. Here's that same pupation process seen from above with varroa mites running around in the cells. Next, the tissue reorganizes in their body and the pigment slowly develops in their eyes. In the last step, their skin shrivels up and they sprout hair.
And that's how they're born. And basically, their sisters will help to take care of them. So the queen's main job is to lay eggs, and the sister bees, or what we call the nurse bees, they actually help to feed them. And that secretion is that royal jelly. That's the pollen that they have to eat in order to make that creamy substance that's called royal jelly. And so while the bees are helping the plants to make babies, right? And the plants are helping the bees to make babies, I'm, as a beekeeper, also trying to help them make more queen mamas. And so this is me. Actually, my daughter took this picture of me when she was 11. And this is me actually transferring some of those little baby larvae that you saw with that royal jelly. I'm moving them over into these special cups, and that's called grafting. And we don't actually have to cut anything. We're just transferring it. So I use a little special tool made out of a duck quill and actually bamboo, and I can just scoop them up gently and while they're floating on the jelly. So I actually don't even touch the larva. And so here's a little diagram. I'm doing the graft, and I wear a headlamp so I can see inside the honeycomb cell. And then I move them over into these special cups. Those go into what we call our nursery hives. And then they pull out all these queen cocoons, which you can see a bigger picture of them here on the right. Those, each one of those that looks like a peanut is going to turn into a queen bee. And so they'll be all new mama queens. And then we handle them really carefully, and we place each one of them in their own new hive. And then several weeks later, we can go back and there'll be a new queen. And actually, she'll emerge from that cocoon and she'll go on what we call mating flights. And then she'll come back and she'll start to lay eggs. And so then we always give them enough time to get established and to start laying new eggs before we go and check on them. And then once we're able to check on them and we see that, oh, they are laying eggs, then we can actually harvest them, and they go in a little tiny container with a few attendants, which are some of these girls that are hanging around. These are some of her daughters. Those are called attendants. And they're in her, what we call her retinue. And they're basically making sure she's got the food she needs and keeping her warm. And so some of them will travel with her, and they'll go to a new home in case a beekeeper maybe has a hive that lost a queen, or they're wanting to make increases, or they want to try new kinds of bees. Like I mentioned in my video, there's different races of bees, and some of them are actually more used to colder weather, some to warmer weather. And so depending on where somebody lives, we can find them a queen that would be a good match for their area. This queen here has a little mark on her back, and that's actually, it's a non-toxic water-based paint. And every year is a different color. There's an international color code. This year, the color is red. But in this particular photo, it was white. So that we use red, green, yellow, white, and blue. And so that way we can keep track of her age, because when you go in to look at a bee queen, she can kind of get lost in all the thousands of bees in there. And so when you see the dot, it's easier to find her. I'm not sure if we have enough time to watch this particular video, but we'll come back to it if we do. This is just more about their jobs, but I wanted to share with you briefly that the worker bees are all female, and then you have the queen bee, who's the mama. She's also a female, and then you also have boy bees, which I'll show you in this other video that I have. And basically they all work together to keep the hive functioning, but the worker bees, or the sister bees, are the ones who do the most work. And they actually start off as housekeepers, then as nurse bees, where they're taking care of other baby bees, and then they actually will become guards, and then they get to start foraging. And they're when they're a forager, that's when they actually go out to collect nectar and pollen. So I'm going to show you here a couple videos about how beekeepers work. And this is my farm partner and me. And he's actually going to pull up a frame of bees for me. Next up in the farm in the Rocky Mountains. I'm looking through each frame to see if I can find the queen to make sure that I don't lose her. And I also look to make sure that they have enough food, have enough pollen and nectar or honey stored. And I also check how their babies are to make sure that they aren't sick. So the lighter brown little spots you see are actually pupae that are they're undergoing metamorphosis in there, and they'll emerge out as adult bees too. And then right there, I'm pointing at one of the boy bees. It's a drone. That's one of the brothers. He's a lot bigger, and he can't actually sting. Cool. I think that's the end of that video. And I have one other video I wanted to show you too that one of my students made for me. I actually work at the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it's an art school. And we actually have students who are learning how to make films and also how to make videos. And so here's one that a student of mine made.
Especially right here in these low areas where the creek beds, it's
Going out there.
Quickly. They have these things called fumes, which is just like the lid that I took off to cure it properly and brush them with the We have one of these at the farm. Like just the frame, but it's tall. One frame out and use a blower.
These just calm the bees.
Make sure she has enough honey. I don't see very much honey up here. So, okay. I'm going to put this one back in the middle where it was. She's not, I'm melting.
That was a newer frame we put in.
And I'm in the mountains, but I'm also in what's called the high desert. So similar to Australia, we have a lot of desert parts, and it can get really hot in our summer. And so it's nice to try and find some bushes for shade and to make sure that bees have water. And so that's one of the things that you can do for bees is plant more flowers, of course, because that's what they use for their food, right? For their pollen, which is their protein, and for the nectar, which they turn into honey, that's their carbohydrate. And so they need a lot of flowers. They say that they need at least 2 million flowers just to make enough honey to make it through the year. So they need a lot of flowers. And that's what you can do is to help plant flowers. And if you live in an apartment, maybe you can plant some in a little container and either put it on your window or on your patio or your balcony. Or if you live somewhere where you have a yard, you can also plant flowers in your yard and at parks. And pretty much you can plant flowers anywhere. There's even people planting flowers on rooftops for rooftop gardens, obviously with adult supervision. So don't do that on your own. But thank you. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
All right, Melanie, thank you for that super cool presentation. I love seeing the videos. And then if you share that link with me for the other one, I'll share it with those who tuned in, and then they can check it out afterwards as well.
For sure.
All right. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick minute and we're going to play a Kahoot quiz together. And we're going to see how well the students were paying attention and see who comes out on top. So I am going to share a little banner here. If you want to take part in this Kahoot quiz, you can go to kahoot.it and the PIN number is 4588138. Now, if you're in a classroom and you have something at your desk, like a tablet or a Chromebook, you can log in directly. If not, Your teacher could put it at the front of the classroom and you can shout out your answers together. Or if you can't get in time, you can just shout out your answers anyways and see how you do. If you're at home, I know we have some homeschools tuning in. You can scan it with a tablet. You can scan the QR code with a phone. And I'm going to put that up right now. Let me put that on the screen there. So you can scan it there. I see we have some students joining us already. That's awesome. We'll give just a minute here. Well, a few are joining us. Melanie, I want to ask you some questions that are coming in the chat. So let's do a question or two while we wait for students to join.
Sure.
And the first question here is from Ryan. Ryan wants to know, how do you put that spot on the queen bee?
Really good question. The short answer is very carefully, but I'll give you a few more details. When I first started working with bees, I used to always wear gloves. And a lot of times we do that because we don't want to get stung, right? But I will definitely tell you, bees are a lot like people. Some of them are seemingly very happy and others can be a little bit cranky. And if the weather is kind of stormy, they're definitely a little bit cranky. So I always try and make sure it's a nice day. And when I started actually rearing queens, one of the places I worked at where they taught me, they said we couldn't wear gloves because then you can't feel if you're holding the queen too tight. So I started actually having to take my gloves off, and that way I could feel the bees better. And they're actually, I don't get stung as often as you think. They're really quite gentle. But I'll come up from behind her and lift her up, and then with my other hand I have the pen and I just mark her thorax.
All right, very cool. And Ramco Primary in South Australia are joining us, and Maddie thinks you're very brave after hearing that.
Oh,
Very
thank
cool.
you. I'll tell you, the bees are the best teachers. I was
Very
definitely
cool.
very nervous, and they've taught me a lot.
All right. So we are going to get the Kahoot started. And then we're going to meet some of our camera classes, and we're going to take quite more questions from YouTube. So just to give you a little heads up, I put 4 questions in, 20 seconds for each question. There's some multiple choice. There's some true and false. Don't worry if you don't have a device. Just shout out your answer and see how you do at the end of the quiz. Here we go. Starting now, a 3-second count in. 3, 2, 1. And our first question is a multiple choice. About how many types of bees are there? Was there about 50, about 500, about 5,000, or about 20,000? How many types of bees? 50, 500, 5,000, or around 20,000? You've got a couple seconds to get that answer in. All right. Most of our crew went with 20,000, and I think that's pretty cool. And what I think is even cooler, Melanie, is there's probably more for us to discover.
Most definitely. We don't even know all the different kinds there are. So lots to still learn.
All right. The stellar pelican is holding down that top spot. Let's go to a little true and false action. The blue-banded bee has been observed all over Australia. Is that true or is that false? The blue-banded bee has been observed all over Australia. All right. That is true. We saw that map. Those red dots were everywhere. I didn't know if I saw any in Tasmania, but it looked like for the most part, they were all around Australia. So the smooth panda has slid right into first place. Let's go to our next question. It's a true and false. All bees live in colonies or hives. Is that true or false? So basically, all bees are social, living in those big groups. Was that true or was that false? We have 6 more seconds to get that answer locked in. Oh, nice and quick. You guys beat the timer. It is false. We learned today there are some solitary bee species, so they live on their own. That puts the glad snail into first place. Our final question is a long one, so I put a little extra time. Bees have symbiotic relationships with plants. This means only the bee benefits, both the plant and the bee benefit. Only the plant benefits, or no one benefits. It's no good for anyone. Which one do you think it is? A, only the bee. B, both the plant and the bee. C, only the plant. Or the last one, no one benefits in this relationship. Oh, no fooling this crew. Overwhelmingly, both the plant and the bee benefit in this symbiotic relationship. Very cool. Let's look at our podium. In third place, we've got the space yak. In second place, we have the glad snail. And rounding it out, first place, we've got the smooth panda holding on for the big win. All right, very cool. I'm going to come back from that screen share. We are changing gears. It is time for some Q&A action. Let's get it going. Okay, here we go. Our first group. Let's see who we should bring in. Let's bring in Ramco Primary. We know Maddie already said hi. She thinks you're super brave. So let's see how they're doing today. Give us a big wave, everybody. How are we doing today? Oh, so cool to see you. Who has a question about bees for Melanie?
Come on, Seamus.
They live in hives.
Not a question.
Aw.
A question. Fletch?
Oh, Melanie, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
I was saying that's cool.
Nice and loud, Fletch.
How do they still sting when they die?
Oh, how is it that they still sting? That's a good question. Do you know that they actually have a muscle in their stinger? It's at the base of their stinger. And so there's a little barb on the end that gets stuck in our skin. And actually, then when the bee tears away, the muscle is still on that little stinger and it will still pump venom in. And it can pump venom in for a few minutes. But that's why if you ever do get stung by accident, don't squeeze it, scrape it off, because then the muscle won't keep pumping. If you squeeze it, you almost help the muscle pump more venom in. And it can definitely be painful. But you know what's interesting? At least with honeybee venom, it can actually be like a medicine for some people who have arthritis or who have other nervous conditions.
TJ, got one? Question?
When they sting, they die.
Yeah, we need questions
That
for
is
them.
true. That is true. They don't necessarily survive it.
Who's got a question for them? Seamus?
How do bees die when they sting?
Oh, we still talked all about that. Daniel, have you got a question?
How does sting you?
How do they sting you? Well, I'll just sort of answer both of those questions kind of together. Usually it's an accident. They feel threatened. They feel like maybe they have to defend their hive. They don't want to actually sting anybody because it takes a lot of energy and they could die, right? So it's actually more if they feel like they need to defend their nest. And so, yeah, that's how they were sort of made to protect their nest. They have a stinger, but they don't necessarily, it's sort of a last resort.
All right. Well, Ramco Primary, we're going to come back your way in a little bit. Before we jump to another camera group, Wendy would like to know the smoke in the video. What was that for?
Great question. So remember at the beginning when I talked about how the queens actually emit a pheromone or like a perfume, right? So the bees, they don't actually have noses like we do. They have their antennae, and their antennae are kind of like their nostrils. And that's how they're able to pick up different scents. And they smell pheromones. So these pheromones are these chemical cues that actually, that's how they communicate. And so when we light a smoker, that can help to dampen some of those pheromonal cues. So for instance, how do they know where to sting? if they're actually feeling threatened, they have a pheromone that they will mark the spot. It smells a little bit like bananas, actually. And so if we use a smoker, then that will help to cover that scent so that the rest of the bees don't feel like they need to defend their nest. So the smoke is actually, we don't use a lot of it, we just use a little, and that's to help calm them. And they will actually, when they smell it, they'll actually be encouraged to go and eat honey. And so then we can go in and check to make sure they have what they need. I like to use it a little bit so that then I don't squish them when I'm putting their frames back or putting the lid back on the top, because then the smoke will help to move them a little bit.
All right. Let's grab a camera classroom. Kalki State School in Queensland. How are we doing today?
Good.
Good. Who's got
Going
a
really
question
well.
for us?
Now. We are very conscious of plastic. If we make beeswax wraps, are we taking too much of their wax away?
That's a great question. And I really appreciate you asking that too, because just like we talked about the word symbiotic, right? So where it's a benefit to the bee and to the flower, the same for our stewardship, or how we help to take care and manage the bees. So you're right. We don't want to take too much. We want to be respectful, but they also need some of their older wax to be harvested. Their wax takes a lot of energy. It takes over 20 pounds of nectar in order for them to sweat out 1 pound of wax. Or I guess 20 pounds is probably closer to almost 40 kilos, right, of nectar. So it takes a lot of energy, but the wax is actually, once they eat a lot of nectar, then they raise their body temperature and they sweat. And so they sweat the wax, and that's what they build their honeycomb with. That ends up becoming their pantry. That's where they store their food. It becomes their nursery where the babies are born. It even becomes their dance floor. That's how they move and vibrate on it in order to share with each other where they can find different resources that they need. And over time, the wax can get really used up and start to turn really dark brown. And so that's when it needs to be harvested for sure. And so it's like changing the sheets on your bed, right? You want to change your sheets every once in a while. And so that's how it is when we harvest the wax. We take the older stuff and then we melt it down, and they will actually sweat out new wax. So your question is really, really important, because we make sure we don't take too much. So we always try and take just the older stuff.
All right. That's a great question. Do you have another one ready for us?
Yes, ma'am.
With so many people eating honey, are we hurting the bees taking so much from them?
Good question. That's kind of similar to the wax one. It's really all about learning how to read and to better understand your landscape, right? So if you live in an area such as myself, and I think where some of you are from in Australia, where it's really dry and hot, then sometimes the flowers that are available are only at certain times of the year, right? But the bees will need food for the whole year. So their whole goal is to harvest a lot of nectar and pollen and then store it so that then they can live off of it the whole year, even when there aren't any flowers. So we have to make sure when we harvest that we only take what is extra. And so depending on what your local conditions are, like if you know, oh, we have flowers at this time of year and at this time of year, then you know that you can take a little bit in between those times, but you always want to make sure you leave it.
All right. Great questions. We're going to go to another camera classroom, but on the way, I want to answer a question from James and Henry. They're in Bundaberg in Queensland, and they want to know, if there's bees that are as small as a grain of salt, how do we discover them? How do we find them?
That is a really good question, because some of them are really hard to see. So when I decided to go to get my graduate degree, to get my master's in entomology, which entomology is the study of insects, I took a class called taxonomy. And basically what we would do is we had these big old nets, and we'd go out into, whether it was the forest or in the grasslands or down by the river or into the woods, and we would actually wish our net around. and it would catch a lot of little insects in it. And then we could actually put them into a vial and look at them under a microscope and see what kind there are. And so, yeah, it's there's that's why we say we have observed 20,000, but there might be even a lot more that we just don't know about yet. And so, various researchers over the years have discovered new species of them, and it's literally been by hanging out outside and seeing what sort of insects land on flowers. You know, if they need nectar and pollen, most likely you're going to see a lot of different ones that land on flowers. And so that's how you can start to see them. The really small ones are called perdita or florea. And then you have really big ones like Apis cerana and dorsata. And then that's within the honey producing species. But there's even what they call xylocopa, which are the big black mason bees or carpenter bees. And they look kind of, you know, intimidating because they're so big, but they're actually quite polite. They're really just trying to get the resources and the pollen and the nectar that they need, and then to be able to provide for their families.
All right. St. Mary's. St. Mary's is hanging out with us today. St. Mary's, what part of Australia are you in?
Western Australia.
West Australia. Very cool. Western Australia.
Cool.
Okay, who's got some questions?
Who's got a question? Eva, big up us.
With the symbiotic connection, with the flowers, what happens if they don't have any pollen on them?
That's a good question. So, you know what the scientists are learning is that the bees are also leaving, remember those pheromonal cues I was talking about, the perfumes? They can actually mark a particular flower so that when another bee comes by, they can smell it and they recognize, oh, that one's already been visited, and they'll move to a different one. So part of that is the bees communicating with each other. And then also sometimes the plants don't all produce pollen and nectar at the same time. Some plants really like it to be really warm when they produce nectar, and others might like it to be colder. So some plants will be offering their pollen and nectar, say in the morning, and the bees will visit them then. But then in the afternoon, they won't be producing any. And so then the bees will find other flowers that have pollen and nectar. So the plants and the bees are all very, very smart, to be honest, because even if it's really hot, the plants they don't want to produce nectar that's going to immediately dehydrate in the heat, right? So the plants have to also be really smart as to when they're going to offer it. And when they get stressed out, such as with bad weather or shifting climate concerns, the plants are definitely going to be affected, right? They're not going to be able to share the best pollen and nectar because they're a little bit stressed. And so that really shows just how interconnected we all are. You know, if our planet is stressed, then our plants will be stressed, and our pollinators, and us as people. So we can all work together to help to change those things.
All right, great question. You have another one there for us.
Miranda, Sarah.
If the bees die when they sting, have you ever seen one that hasn't?
If can you say that one more time? Is what happens when they sting?
If the bees sting and if the bees die when they sting, have you ever seen one that hasn't died when they stung, or do they just all die?
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, it really depends on what they're stinging. For those of us, which we call mammalian skin, so we're mammals, right? And mammals have a particular kind of skin, and when the bees will sting, they have a barb on the end, and the barb gets stuck. But when they sting other types of skin, such as like say reptile skin, the barb doesn't get stuck, so they actually won't die. There's also a type of therapy called apitherapy. So api means bee, and so apitherapy means therapy with bees. And some people will use the venom to help with arthritis or like Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis. And there are practitioners, basically doctors, who have learned how to guide the bee to sting, but then to help to move the bee out without them losing their stinger so that they don't die.
Okay, Western Australia, some great questions. Let's I want to remind we've got a group backstage. Kara Makos, your camera didn't connect, but if you use the private chat, you can send us a question or two. Let's grab one or two more from YouTube before we wrap up for today. So a lot of people are asking about bees and what eat bees. People are wondering, do frogs eat bees? Do wasps eat bee larvae? What eats bees? That's what people are dying to know on YouTube.
Well, there's a lot of things that eat bees, actually. So in the insect world, you have a lot of insects that are actually what we call predatory or predators, right? And so they are actually also carnivorous, and so they will look to catch other insects to eat. So sometimes bees are eaten by other insects like praying mantises, or even arachnids. Sometimes spiders like to eat bees too. Birds also like to eat bees. I mean, birds like to eat other little insects and worms and stuff, and they do like bees. Skunks really like to eat bees. They will actually come at night and scratch on the hive, and the bees will come out to sort of see who's knocking, and then the skunks will just eat them. Bears, of course, like to eat bees, and people tend to think that bears like honey, which I think they kind of like honey, but you know what they like even more than honey is they actually like the larva because it's super high protein. And so usually when the season's changing before the bears are going to get ready to hibernate, that's when they can find hives and they can really actually do a number. I know we like to think that Pooh is a nice little bear, but sometimes the real bears can be much more destructive. And then there's also like honey badgers that will eat bees. You have frogs, of course, that will also eat some types of bees. There's a lot of different animal species that are, um, you know, they're going to figure out within their environment what they need to do to survive. And so sometimes they will eat bees. Bees actually, if they live in large numbers, right, then they're a part of that larger cycle of life. And so with that comes birth, right? There comes life and there also comes death, but that's just a transition. And also it's about recycling too. You know, I mean, we come from the earth and we can go back to the earth. And so even though some of these bees may not live a long time, they've helped to give life to more other beings as well.
All right. Well, it's just part of being in an ecosystem.
That's right.
Eat and be eaten. Very cool. Everybody plays a role. All right. Well, we're coming to the part of the event, always the saddest part of the event when we have to start winding down and wrapping things up. So I do want to say, as we prepare to close out our Jane Garcia's Heroes program, we've had some great questions from Melanie, and hopefully everybody tuning in has learned a lot about honeybees. As I said at the beginning of the program, you're invited to take part in Roots and Shoots in your community. To learn more, you can go to rootsandshoots.global or joinjane.org. You can ask your teacher or your parents to help out and get you connected. And before we wrap up, I think that message would be best to come from somebody else. And I'm going to bring this little clip in live for us right now. Here we go.
Please join Roots and Shoots and find out how you too can make a difference in your community and help save the planet.
All right, so joinjane.org, also rootsandshoots.global will work. We'll leave that up there for a little moment as we wrap things up for today. So like Melanie, like Jane Garcia, and of course Jane Goodall, you too can make a difference. Before we sign off today, Melanie, I think we should give our classrooms a chance to get a little bit loud, maybe a big goodbye and thank you from our crews. So let me bring them back in here. If you want to get a little bit loud, we had classes today in New South Wales, in South Australia, Western Australia, in Queensland. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Give us a big wave. So cool to see everybody. And Melanie, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your honeybee adventures. It was so great to have a chance to be with you today and to ask some questions.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just like the bees and the flowers have their stories, so do you. So get out there and create your stories and share your stories.
All right. Well, again, thanks everybody. It was awesome to see you. Thank you to everybody tuning in via YouTube as well, and everybody who might watch this video later. It was awesome to be here. Hopefully we'll see you in some future events. But for now, Australia, we are going to sign off. Thank you so much. We'll see ya.
Thank you. Bye.